Isaiah Prince is the Falcons' new swing tackle, and yes, Parker Hesse has returned.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed by visiting FanDuel.com/Locked On to get started. And guys, if you don't know me, I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman. Of course, you've seen my coverage of the Atlanta Falcons for many years, dating back decades, over formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. But you may also know me as my aliases here on this humble podcast. Those, of course, are Sirius Black, also Mr. Drew. My friends call me Negative Nancy, but you can call me Mr. Drew. But you can become one of my friends and call me Negative Nancy by becoming an everydayer. And all you got to do is make this illustrious podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we are celebrating the triumphant return of Parker Hesse, but that will be a little bit later in the show. We'll talk about the 14 players that the Falcons signed to their practice squad today that included Parker Hesse. We'll get to those later, but we'll start things off talking about the Falcons' new swing tackle, right? The Falcons did waive Josh Miles, the sort of incumbent, I guess you could say, the default swing tackle this morning. And we're assuming that he'll be re-signed to the practice squad, but we'll just sort of have to see about that. And to make room, or they cut Josh Miles to make room for the new swing tackle, who is ex-Broncos, ex-Bengals, ex-Dolphins offensive tackle Isaiah Prince. Right? The Falcons didn't put in any other waiver claims to pick up anybody else. So, we'll see what other moves are made over the next 10 days. But so far, this seems to be the only one. And if you don't know who Isaiah Prince is, it's understandable. He was a 6th-round pick of the Dolphins back in 2019, formerly of Ohio State. He did log 2 starts that year in their sort of tank for Tua season where they had an atrocious offensive line. He wound up getting cut later that season, got scooped up by the Bengals, opted out of 2020 due to COVID, came back with the Bengals as a backup right tackle for them in 2021. He did wind up starting games at right tackle for them down the stretch during their Super Bowl playoff run. According to Pro Football Focus, in the 8 games that he started, he gave up 4 sacks and 31 pressures. If you extrapolate that over a full 17-game season, that would be 8.5 sacks and 66 pressures. And just for the sake of comparison, Dennis Daly gave up the most pressures for tackles last year in the regular season with 52. So 66 compared to 52. So clearly he was not getting the job done in pass protection among offensive tackles in 2021. PFF graded him in the 6th percentile as a pass blocker. But on the flip side, he did grade out in the 55th percentile as a run blocker. So a slightly above average run blocker, frankly, a terrible pass blocker based off of those PFF grades. Then after a rough 2021 season, he was put on IR at the beginning of the 2022 season with an elbow injury, and then finished the year on the Bengals practice squad. Then the Broncos scooped him up this past offseason, and they, of course, cut him this past Sunday, where the Falcons were able to pick him up today on Wednesday. Now, if you look at the PFF grades that he had this summer with the Broncos, they were pretty solid, right? But we also know that PFF graded Jalen Mayfield very highly after his Dolphins game, and we know we can't always trust them when it comes to those grades. So I sat down and watched every snap of Isaiah Prince on all 22 from this preseason. And I'll just tell you up front, I was not impressed, right? I'm not sure he's an upgrade over what Josh Miles is based off of what Josh Miles did on film this summer. But what I will say about Isaiah Prince is that he looks the part at 6'7", 305 with 35-plus-inch arms. If you were to build a left tackle in a lab, he'd come out looking a lot like Isaiah Prince. He's definitely somebody that you go, ooh, when he gets off the bus, you're like, oh, who's that guy? I don't want to play against him. Right? He tested very well, 7.6 RAS score, relative athletic score, with a very good broad jump, a good 40 time. His agilities weren't quite up to par, but you see the tools, you see the movement, you see the athleticism. So he is an intriguing player with upside because of all those things, those physical abilities that he has. But the issue with Isaiah Prince, despite that physical ability, is the technique and the refinement is not there, right? And he's now entering his 5th NFL season, and some of the things that you would hope to have been coached out of him have not been coached out of him. And maybe that's due to not getting the development by sitting out that year due to COVID, and then having another season scrapped, mostly due to injury and whatnot. So the main issues obviously are in pass protection. And the main issues from a technical standpoint that I saw in film repeatedly this past summer in Denver was he punches with both hands. And that's not something that you can do in the NFL. That's something that rookies tend to do. Like Caleb McGarry did a lot in his rookie year, but then he fixed that, right? Because what happens is when you punch with both hands, you want to punch with one hand and then use the second hand to basically, once you redirect that defender to then grab that defender, independent hands and all that stuff. It's basically, that's sort of the technical aspects of it. But when you punch with both hands, if the defender swipes or chops that hand, you're done, right? And because Isaiah Prince is so tall, he has a tendency to bend at the waist to try to get lower and try to present a smaller target for, defenders to, bull rush him and do all those things. But what he does as a waist bender rather than a knee bender, you want to be a knee bender, not a waist bender, because when you bend your waist, your center of gravity is thrown off. And so what happens when he does that double-handed punch and the defender chops it, he gets overextended and he, falls over and can't recover in that way. And I think even though he's graded out as a decent to good run blocker, watching the film, I'm like, I don't think he's that good of a run blocker, in part due to how tall he is, right? I think that limits how low he can get, where, run blocking and it's about leverage, right? And low man wins. And he just struggles to get low enough to basically move defenders off the ball, right? But, in theory, the idea with Isaiah Prince, because of that, the physical tools and the upside, you want to see what Dwayne Ledford can do with him. Can he coach him up, right? And, you hope that the coaching can fix a lot of these technical flaws that are still present in Isaiah Prince's game. And the theory that we're going to tell ourselves, whether this winds up proving true or not, remains to be seen. But we're going to sit here and say, look, he was poorly coached in Miami. He was poorly coached in Cincinnati. And we will evidence that from the fact that they were bad offensive lines then. They're still bad offensive lines today. And so clearly they're not coaching up guys consistently in those two places. And so Atlanta is going to be really the first time he gets good coaching under Dwayne Ledford. But without exponential growth from a technical standpoint that he's going to come over the next few months, that he's going to be here in Atlanta, right? I don't know if I feel any more comfortable with Isaiah Prince starting games in the event of an injury to Jake Matthews or Caleb McGarry than I would with Josh Miles at this point in time. So without that exponential growth from a technical standpoint, like, to me, it's kind of a lateral move, at least. Now, in theory, Prince has more upside and whatnot, but as we often say on this podcast, beggars can't be choosers. And so, if I'm you, and, depending on what you believe in, what higher power you subscribe to, when you're laying your head down at bed at night, when you're saying your prayers, right, I think you should also say a prayer for the soft tissues, the joints and the bones of Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry, because we want to see those things, 100% by year's end. That's basically what I would say. So, we'll see how long Isaiah Prince sticks on the roster. I'm not convinced that, he's guaranteed to be here 6 weeks from now. Like, this may be sort of a revolving door as the Falcons try to figure out their depth issues at that position, but we'll see. We know Terry likes to churn the back end of the roster, so that will be something to keep an eye on, but we'll see. But it all ain't bad, guys. It's not all bad news today, because Parker Hesse's back, right? He's one of 14 players that the Falcons signed to the practice squad today, and we'll break all of that down to continue today's Locked On Falcons. So, guys, get ready for the NFL season with the incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and they'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. If you're on the fence, about getting Sunday Ticket, and I know for me, like, I've gone back and forth, I'm always looking for that discount to justify my, purchase. I think FanDuel is giving you a great offer. So it's the best time to join FanDuel. And of course, not only are you getting that offer for Sunday Ticket, it's also the great place to go, to bet the player props and the spreads and all that for the upcoming NFL season. They have an app that's safe, it's easy to use. And all you got to do to sign up is visit fanduel.com/locked on, and you can kick off the NFL season with an offer that you don't want to miss. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. So there are 14 players that the Falcons signed to their practice squad on Wednesday. They were running back Godwin Igwebuike, wide receiver Xavier Malone, wide receiver Matthew Sexton, tight end Parker Hesse, tight end Tucker Fisk, tackle Tyler Vrabel, tackle Barry Wesley, guard Justin Schaefer, defensive tackle Timmy Horn, defensive tackle LaCale London, edge rusher Kamoko Toure, linebacker Andre Smith, cornerback Natron Brooks, and safety Micah Abernathy. So four out of the five guys that I predicted to make the roster that didn't were re-signed to the practice squad. Those were Igwebuike, Parker Hesse, Timmy Horn, and Micah Abernathy. Darren Hall was the fifth guy that was not re-signed to the practice squad. We'll see what happens with him moving forward, but maybe the Falcons have moved on from Darren Hall. And so with 14 signed, there's 16 spots available in the practice squad. There's 2 spots open. One of those could go to Josh Miles. We'll see, right? Last year, they initially signed 12 guys on day one of establishing the practice squad, then 3 guys the next day. And then they waited like the better part of a week before they picked up that last guy, which was, I think, Kyrus Tonga, the nose tackle from the Bears, to complete their set. And I think he lasted maybe like a week or two before the Vikings picked him up. But, we'll talk about Parker Hesse coming up later to wrap up today's episode. But, if you've been listening to this podcast all summer long and making it your first listen each and every day, or your fifth listen each and every day, doesn't really matter when you listen to it. We prefer first thing in the morning, but, do you? Yeah, right. But I don't think you heard any of those names and you're surprised that those guys were on the practice squad. Most of those guys were on my final practice squad projection that we did, starting out this week. The 3 that were not were Matthew Sexton, Barry Wesley, and Justin Schaefer. I was very close to putting Sexton on my final practice squad projection because it was notable to me how many snaps he was getting on special teams, especially against the Steelers, returning kicks, working as a gunner, all that and more. That was kind of telling me something, but I thought at the end of the day, Penny Hart would get that 3rd wide receiver spot along with JJ Arcega-Whiteside. But, Hart's on IR. Arcega-Whiteside is we'll see what happens with him. But, Wesley was another guy that I don't think was bad this summer, right? But he didn't necessarily stand out in a major way. He was just consistently okay, right? And given how many offensive linemen this summer in the preseason were up and down, that probably helped his case. It was he was never really up. He was never really down. He was just fine, right? And Schaefer was one of those guys that was very up and down. And I think saying Schaefer was up at any point is being generous, but he's probably the one surprise in terms of the practice squad, but I think his draft status is what wound up saving him at this point in time. I don't think he was particularly good. I would say him alongside Jonathan Harrison and Jalen Mayfield were probably the guys that had the worst reps in the preseason games this summer. But again, draft status matters. And, I did go back and watch some more film of Justin Schaefer last night to just double check, because I'll admit that once we got to the 4th quarter of these preseason games, I was not as locked in watching the film as I was in the early parts of the games. So I was just okay, maybe I missed some stuff with Justin Schaefer, and I saw some minor improvements in his game from year 1 to year 2. He was so raw coming out of Georgia, but I guess you could say he's trending in the right direction, but I still feel like he has such a long way to go before he is a rosterable player, that he's just going to sort of languish on the practice squad forever without big gains over the next year or so. So we'll see if he gets that development, if he makes that year 3 jump, right? Or he finds himself like some of these other guys that did not necessarily make big year 2 jumps, like that 2021 draft class where we saw, the Darren Halls and the Jalen Mayfields, get the boot, going into year 3. So we'll see what happens with Justin Schaefer in the future. But he's probably the one guy that I'd be okay, I think you're just keeping him just because you drafted him and you don't want to give up on your draft. But maybe that's going to be a new rule with this regime where it's like they won't give up on a draft pick until the third year, right? Like that may be the situation. So we'll see how that plays out for Justin Schaefer as well. We'll talk, of course, about the triumphant return of Parker Hesse to continue and wrap up today's episode. And I appreciate your patience for that. And we'll get into that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So before we dive deep into the triumphant return of Parker Hesse, I want to give another shout out to my everydayers out there. We'll be starting up a new service pretty soon. We started a Discord last year. We'll be doing something else that will allow you to kind of one-on-one communicate with me in the future this upcoming season. So I just wanted to let you guys know that it will be a paid service, but that will be something that hopefully we'll be able to unroll next week ahead of week 1. So if you want to sign up for that, but I'll give further details once I have more information on that. But that's something to look forward to. Of course, continue to make your illustrious podcast your first listen each and every day. We appreciate you. Tomorrow, I think we'll do a Q&A. So if you have questions, going after preseason, going into the season, that will be the opportunity to ask those questions. Of course, the places to send those questions, in the future, we might use that service where you can just kind of text your questions to me. But for now, you can send them via email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. You can leave a comment here on the YouTube channel. You can hit the Discord up, the link in the description below. Or, of course, you could hit me up on Locked On Falcons on Twitter as well. Those are the places to go to submit your questions. But let's talk Parker Hesse. So, obviously, if you listened to yesterday's episode, I shared my concerns about in being skeptical of the decision to cut Parker Hesse, right? And I've been listening to other people's thoughts on the roster as well, and the thoughts on cutting Parker Hesse, because I think most people agree that that was the one surprise cut for the Falcons, over the last 24 hours. And, shout out to New Millennium Falcons. Also listen to the Falcons Final Whistle podcast on the official site. And I thought Tori McElhaney said something interesting on that episode when they were breaking down the 53, and that she basically said that it was maybe tougher for John FitzPatrick to clear waivers than Parker Hesse would, given FitzPatrick's, youth and talent and upside and all that various things. I don't necessarily agree, but like at the same time, like I don't think she's wrong for saying that. Like I think that's a very valid opinion. So, splitting hairs on that one. We did see one blocking tight end get claimed off of waivers. That was the Packers picked up Ben Sims. So maybe, he was, I think he was a rookie this year. So maybe, a team was looking for a young, developmental, talented blocking tight end like a John FitzPatrick. So who knows at that point in time. But, Parker Hesse is back on the practice squad. So he cleared waivers, all that stuff and more. And for those that need to understand how the practice squad works, basically you get you're an employee of the team. You get a stipend, like a few $1,000s each week for every week that you practice with the team. But technically you're also a free agent. Like you're free to sign with another team. Now you can only sign to another team's 53-man roster. Like you can't make a lateral move from the Falcons practice squad to the Packers practice squad or anything like that. But you can go from the Falcons roster to the Packers, or the Falcons practice squad to the Packers roster. And the Falcons can't really do anything to stop you other than say, please don't go. Right. Like maybe they can say, they can convince you to be like, okay, please don't go and all that stuff. But like, if you want to leave, you can leave because you are a free agent basically. And so the only way that the Falcons can really stop teams from poaching players off their practice squad, like a Parker Hesse, is by having them on the roster. Now, they did institute a rule during COVID where you can like protect 4 players when they expanded the practice squad from like 12 to 16 guys, that you can protect like 4 players each week. And I think you have to designate them like Monday or Tuesday or whatever. I don't know where that status of that rule. I think it still exists. I don't know if there's like a limit on how many times you can protect a player during the season. I think there was in 2020. I don't know if that still exists in 2023. So we'll sort of see. But again, the only way that the Falcons can guarantee that no one comes along and poaches Parker Hesse besides that rule, whatever it is to have him on the roster. And hopefully we'll not be having another freak out about Parker Hesse, because the Falcons will do the right thing and bring him up to their 53-man roster. And I know Terry and Arthur that make this illustrious podcast their first listen, don't want another freak out. So I think they'll do the right thing by doing that. And I think my best guess is the Falcons will do that at some point in the next 10 days, similar to what they did with Anthony Firkser last year, where if you recall last year, Anthony Firkser was supposed to be the number 2 tight end, not the number 3 tight end that Parker Hesse is supposed to be. And the Falcons cut him, and then they put him on the practice squad, and we're like, what are the Falcons doing with Firkser on the practice squad? He's going to play. And it was like, yeah, we spent like a week speculating when are they going to bring Anthony Firkser up from the practice squad to the roster. They did that ahead of the week 1 game. Then they put him back on the practice squad after the week 1 game. And then later that week, like on a Wednesday, they were like, okay, we'll bring you up permanently to the active roster. And that's where he stayed for the rest of the season. And I suspect that may be something that the Falcons will do with Hesse. Is that a way to avoid guaranteeing his base salary this year? Maybe, again, it's a few $100,000 more than what they would be paying. I don't know, but like, we'll see. But, my guess is like we'll see Parker Hesse on Sundays, and he'll be the number 3 or 4 tight end, depending on what you think Michael Pruitt's role is going to be this year. And he'll get more snaps over John FitzPatrick on Sundays this year, right? I have a hard time imagining the Falcons being like, yeah, we prefer John FitzPatrick over Parker Hesse. And it's not because I think FitzPatrick is a bad blocker, right? He's a perfectly fine blocker. He's just not on Parker Hesse's levels. It's like the difference between FitzPatrick being a C+ blocker and Hesse being like an A- blocker. Now, I know a lot of people think like, oh, well, FitzPatrick makes up for that by having more upside as a pass catcher than Parker Hesse. And it's like, yes, you're right. He does have more upside, but I don't know if the gap between them as pass catchers is as big as you think, right? Because like my ceiling comp for FitzPatrick was Levine Toilolo. Like that to me was the best case scenario for him in the NFL. And if you go back and look at the 4 years that Levine Toilolo was a number 2 tight end in the NFL, playing roughly half the snaps in a season, you know how many catches he averaged a year? 13. You know how many catches Parker Hesse had last year? 9. So, you even look at a unicorn like Michael Pruitt last year, who spent almost half the season as the team's main pass catching tight end, and he still only caught 16 passes last year, right? So I know it sounds like I'm bashing John FitzPatrick when I say these things, which I'm trying not to do. That's not my intention here. But I don't think the upside of John FitzPatrick as a pass catcher is as big as some people would lead you to believe. Like it's basically the difference between, Parker Hesse getting 9 catches, and John FitzPatrick getting like 16 catches or something. Like it's a half dozen passes. Like I don't think that's really moving the needle in a major way. So like to me, Fitzpatrick's upside as a pass catcher is on the same level as a Levine Toilolo or Luke Stocker. As I said yesterday, like if you're throwing the ball to him or Parker Hesse, it probably means bad thing, like nobody else got open or the quarterback is about to get hit and he has to check it down in the flat, one of these dump off sort of plays on these rollouts and whatnot. That's where the vast majority of their catches come from. And so like, I don't think that's as worthy as some people think it is. It'll be like we have to keep John FitzPatrick long term because he's got so much untapped potential as a pass catcher. Again, not trying to bash him, but I just think the best case scenario is a guy that's probably going to catch no more than like 15 passes in the season. I just sit here and I ask, okay, if John FitzPatrick has the upside to be Levine Toilolo or a Luke Stocker type of player, which I don't think John FitzPatrick is there as a blocker that those two guys were, but like he should get there eventually at some point, maybe by the end of this year even. If I had to give you the choice of Levine Toilolo, Luke Stocker, or Parker Hesse, who do you think is going to help this team win more games? Is basically the question I'm asking. And I don't know about your choice, but I'm going Parker Hesse. Now, I'm sure some of you guys think I'm biased, but I'm willing to bet most of you guys will go with Parker Hesse too. And like I have a soft spot for like Levine Toilolo and Luke Stocker and obviously Parker Hesse as well. So it's not even to be like, I hate John FitzPatrick or anything. Like I'm sure like a year or two from now, like if the Falcons cut John FitzPatrick, I'm going to be freaking out and having a mini meltdown on the podcast. I'm like, oh, how can you cut John FitzPatrick? Like those types of players are the players that I like, right? Like, not to be overly a film snob, but like those are the types of players that I think you can only really appreciate if you watch film because you see how valuable they can be in the run game and allow your run game to potentially flourish. But you won't appreciate those players because they rarely show up on the stat sheets, right? They'll catch a dump off every now and then. You might get a tight end leak and you go like, oh my God, I can't believe Levine Toilolo caught a 40-yard touchdown on a tight end throwback or whatever. And FitzPatrick the same way. But like other than that, like you don't really notice those guys unless you're really dialed into the film. So my guess is that we'll see Parker Hesse get elevated from the practice squad between now and week 1. And it'll be similar to the Ferkser situation where he'll be sort of on the roster for the rest of the year, but for reasons the Falcons chose to cut him and hope that, he could clear waivers and get back. So, my guess, like, I don't think they'll cut FitzPatrick, right? Like I would probably, if I was guessing, this is just purely a guess. My guess is like Logan Woodside would probably be the guy that Hesse would replace on the roster. Cause again, like no offense to Logan Woodside, I think he balled out this year. He blew the doors off of, I know Falcon fans have a soft spot for Kurt Benkert. I personally don't, but if you thought Kurt Benkert was, an A+ number 3 quarterback, then Logan Woodside was like an A++++. He blew the doors off of anything Kurt Benkert did here in Atlanta as a number 3. So no shade at Logan Woodside. He definitely earned a roster spot. But again, as I've said a number of times on this podcast, like what's the value of having a number 3 quarterback on your roster this year? Like it's valuable in January when your season's on the line, but what are the odds that, both Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke are going to get hurt in a game and you're going to need Logan Woodside to win you a game on Sunday? Extremely low, like less than 1% chance of that happening in the regular season. So to me, like, I get why you might want to hold on to Logan Woodside for the next couple of days. So to make sure that it's less likely that some team is going to claim him if you wind up waiving him next week. So I get that. So like, that's what I'm thinking is going to happen, but we'll see how it plays out. Obviously we'll be breaking it down here on this illustrious podcast. Tomorrow we'll be breaking down your questions and answering your questions, as well as any other roster moves that the Falcons wind up making. So please submit your questions via Discord, via YouTube comment, via Twitter, via email. LockedOnFalcons@mail.com is once again the email address. And also because it is Dragon Con this weekend, although I wonder, how Idalia, the hurricane, is going to affect that. But if you're been admiring, the Toph picture on the back of my wall, my friend who drew that picture, I don't know what 100% certainty, but she usually goes to Dragon Con each year. So go check her out. And if she isn't there, then you can still check out her website. I'll put the link in the description below, Judy Blue Creations. If you are interested in, finding your own, Toph Beifong or whatever. She's drawn hundreds of characters. So there are plenty to choose from. I'm sure you will find something that you will like. So I'll put that link in the description below if you want to check that out. And I've been just waiting that the GOAT wall, only GOATs go on that wall, the world's greatest airbender, the world's greatest, pass rusher. And I'm waiting to put Julio up there. I've been just waiting to hope that he wasn't going to sign with anybody. So I might wait a couple more days, just to make sure he doesn't sign with anybody. And then we'll put Julio back up on the GOAT wall where he belongs. All right. So that is it, guys. Really appreciate you for tuning in. Continue to make us your first listen. For your second listen, of course, check out the Locked On NFL podcast to find out what's going on with the other 31 NFL teams. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.